It started as an ordinary afternoon. Barron Trump, wearing a simple outfit and a red MAGA hat, stepped into a cozy restaurant known for its welcoming atmosphere and hearty meals. The kind of place where families gathered, conversations flowed easily, and strangers often exchanged polite nods. For Barron, it was just another stop in a day filled with routines, a quick meal before moving on. The air carried the comforting hum of silverware clinking against plates, low murmurs of conversation, and the occasional laughter of children. He took his seat, quietly placing his order, just another customer blending into the crowd. The staff moved about, busy but cheerful, while diners focused on their meals or chatted among themselves. But as Barron sat there, something began to change. Whispers started at one corner of the room, faint but noticeable, gradually spreading like a ripple. A few heads turned his way, some faces holding expressions of surprise, others unreadable. Still, Barron remained composed, seemingly unaware of the quiet attention beginning to gather around him. Then came the unexpected moment. A manager approached, their steps purposeful yet hesitant. The hum of the restaurant seemed to soften, as though the room itself had begun to hold its breath. Standing at Barron's table, the manager spoke, their voice low but firm, the words carrying an unmistakable weight. They asked him to leave, pointing out the MAGA hat as the reason. For a brief second, the room froze. Conversation stopped, forks paused mid-air, and all eyes turned toward the young man. The contrast between the lively atmosphere just moments before and the sudden, sharp tension now hanging in the air was undeniable. Yet, Barron didn't flinch. His expression didn't harden, nor did he respond with anger or frustration. Instead, he looked at the manager, his face calm but thoughtful, as though trying to understand the situation fully. In that silence, the restaurant felt divided. Some diners exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident. Others avoided looking at all, keeping their attention fixed firmly on their plates. And then there were those who watched intently, waiting to see what would happen next. Barron, however, didn't make a scene. He didn't raise his voice or demand an explanation. Instead, he stood, adjusted his hat, and offered a polite nod to the manager before walking toward the exit. But this wasn't the end of the moment, it was only the beginning. What Barron did next left everyone in the restaurant, and soon people far beyond its walls, questioning everything they thought they knew about how to respond to conflict. As Barron walked through the doors and onto the lively street, the restaurant behind him seemed to breathe a collective sigh. Inside, diners shifted in their seats, murmurs began to rise, and the once tense atmosphere was now filled with an uneasy sense of unfinished business. Some diners whispered to each other, recounting what they had just seen, while others looked toward the manager, unsure if they should say something or stay silent. It wasn't just what had happened that was startling, it was how Barron had handled it. Outside, Barron paused for a moment. He adjusted his cap slightly and looked around, his face calm but thoughtful. He wasn't consumed by anger or frustration. If anything, he seemed to be processing what the incident meant, not just for him but for everyone involved. A nearby onlooker, who hadn't been inside but had caught a glimpse of the interaction through the window, approached him with curiosity. "What happened in there?" they asked, their voice a mix of concern and intrigue. Barron turned to them, offering a polite smile. "Nothing worth making a scene about," he replied quietly. His response was as measured as his actions inside, and yet, it left the onlooker with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, back in the restaurant, the conversations were growing louder. "Did you see how calm he was?" one diner whispered to another. "I thought he'd argue or at least ask why, but he didn't. He just left." Another diner chimed in, "I don't agree with the hat, but the way he handled it. I didn't expect that." Even the manager, who had made the decision to ask Barron to leave, seemed unsettled, their earlier confidence now replaced with a hint of doubt. What no one realized at the time was that this moment wasn't about to fade into the background. One diner, moved by what they had witnessed, pulled out their phone and began typing. The post was simple but detailed, recounting how a young man, asked to leave a restaurant over his hat, had responded with calm words and quiet grace. "I don't care about politics," the post read, but the way he handled himself was remarkable. It's a lesson in how to respond to situations with dignity. Your support means so much, and it's what allows us to share stories that connect us all. Where are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear. And if this story is resonating with you so far, kindly like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might appreciate its message. Barron stood still as the manager's words settled in the air, his expression neutral but contemplative. He didn't react immediately, didn't rush to respond. Instead, he glanced briefly around the room, noticing the curious eyes of the diners, the quiet murmur of unease beginning to spread among them. His gaze returned to the manager, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh his options, not out of defiance, but as though searching for the best way to leave the moment intact without adding to its tension. He offered a small, polite nod, his movements deliberate, almost thoughtful. There was no anger in his face, no frustration, only a quiet disappointment that seemed to reflect more on the situation than the people involved. Without uttering a single word, he adjusted his cap and turned toward the exit, his posture calm and composed, each step a testament to his restraint. The diners continued to watch in silence, some leaning slightly forward as if expecting a last-minute confrontation. But Barron didn't look back, didn't give any indication of lingering bitterness. His actions spoke louder than any argument could have, leaving an impression on those who observed him. For a young man in a moment of public scrutiny, his reaction carried a maturity that caught many off guard. What would you have done in his place? Would you have tried to defend yourself, to explain or reason with the manager? Or would you have chosen, as Barron did, to leave without adding to the conflict? These are the kinds of moments that test character, and Barron's choice raised questions not just for those in the restaurant, but for anyone who later heard the story. As he stepped out onto the street, Barron's thoughts weren't focused on himself, but on the meaning of the interaction. Why had something as simple as a hat created such a moment of tension? What could he take from this experience, and how could he turn it into something constructive? His ability to reflect rather than react would soon prove to be a pivotal part of what happened next, a choice that would resonate far beyond that restaurant. As Barron walked away from the restaurant, his thoughts were not consumed by frustration or outrage. For him, it wasn't about making a political statement or proving anyone wrong. Instead, his focus seemed to shift toward understanding. Why had a simple choice of clothing led to such a divisive moment? What did it say about how people interact with those who hold different perspectives? These questions weren't born from anger, they were born from a desire to grasp the larger picture. Barron's ability to remain calm in the face of such a public moment was a reflection of his character. It wasn't defiance or submission, it was a choice rooted in self-control. He understood that reacting emotionally would only escalate the situation. Instead, he demonstrated restraint, allowing his actions to speak for him in a way that words couldn't. Onlookers inside the restaurant, still discussing the scene, couldn't help but notice his poise. One diner remarked quietly to their companion, he didn't even flinch. You'd expect someone to at least ask why, but he just left, like he was thinking about something bigger. This comment reflected the unspoken truth. Barron's calm demeanor had turned what could have been a heated exchange into a moment of reflection for everyone involved. This wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about the principle of how we treat one another in moments of disagreement. Barron's reaction showed a level of maturity that transcended the immediate conflict. It was a quiet reminder that dignity often comes from choosing not to engage in negativity, even when provoked. Now, let me ask you, how do you think you would have handled such a moment? Would you have reacted differently, or do you think staying calm and walking away is sometimes the best response? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The manager stood just a few feet from Barron, their expression firm but visibly tense. It was clear they were not acting entirely of their own accord. Their eyes briefly darted toward a group of diners seated near the corner of the restaurant, who exchanged uneasy looks as if their own discomfort had initiated the unfolding moment. The manager's voice, though controlled, carried an edge of nervousness as they gestured toward the door. You need to leave, they said, their tone unwavering despite the tension in the room. It wasn't loud or confrontational, but it was enough to silence the faint hum of conversations. The atmosphere shifted sharply. Some diners suddenly turned their heads, their curiosity getting the better of them. Others avoided looking in Barron's direction altogether, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding scene but unwilling to intervene. Barron didn't respond immediately. Instead, he remained still, his gaze steady as he took in the situation. The room felt charged, filled with the weight of unspoken words. A few whispers began to rise from scattered tables, some questioning what had prompted such a drastic measure, others murmuring quiet agreement with the manager's decision. Despite the rising tension, Barron's demeanor stayed calm, his expression more contemplative than defensive. The manager, perhaps hoping to de-escalate, gestured again, this time with a hint of hesitation. Their confidence seemed to falter slightly as they noticed Barron's quiet composure, a sharp contrast to the unease now rippling through the room. They likely hadn't expected this reaction. Perhaps they had braced themselves for an argument or defiance, but the lack of either left them visibly uncertain. The diners weren't immune to the gravity of the moment. A young couple whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Barron and the manager. One of them muttered, "Why did they single him out? He wasn't doing anything." An older man seated at the bar frowned deeply but said nothing, his expression alone suggesting disapproval of how the situation was being handled. Have you ever been in a moment like this? A moment where the room seems to hold its breath and everyone waits for what will happen next? These situations test not only the person at the center of them but also those watching from the sidelines. Do you speak up? Do you stay quiet? What would you have done in this moment? As Barron walked toward the exit, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds of clinking plates and casual chatter had faded into an uneasy silence. Every step he took felt louder than it should have, each one a quiet reminder of the tension that had filled the room just moments before. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about the questions it left behind. At one table, a woman leaned toward her companion, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think they were right to ask him to leave?" she asked, her tone more uncertain than critical. The man sitting across from her shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know," he replied quietly. But the way he handled it, you'd expect more of a reaction. Other diners exchanged glances but remained silent, their expressions ranging from unease to quiet approval of Barron's composed departure. At the back of the room, a small group of friends spoke in hushed tones. "He didn't even argue," one of them remarked. "That says a lot about him." Another nodded, adding, "I wonder what I would have done if it were me." The manager, standing awkwardly near the front, seemed to realize that their decision had left an impression beyond what they had anticipated. Their confidence from earlier had waned, replaced by a visible uncertainty as they glanced around the room. It was clear they were aware that this wasn't just another routine interaction, it was something people would remember, and not necessarily in the way they had intended. Meanwhile, a young child sitting with their parents asked loudly, "Why did that boy leave?" The innocent question hung in the air for a moment before the mother leaned down and whispered a response, her words inaudible to the rest of the room. But the child's curious gaze lingered on the door where Barron had exited, as if sensing there was more to the story than they could understand. The emotional weight of the moment wasn't just about what had unfolded, it was about what it revealed. It showed how a single act, a single decision, could leave an entire room divided, questioning not just the fairness of the situation but also their own role within it. Some wondered if they should have spoken up, while others felt justified in their silence. And now I want to ask you, if you had been there, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet like most of the diners, or would you have stepped in to voice your opinion? These are the kinds of moments that challenge us, not just as individuals but as a community. How do we handle situations where discomfort meets principle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Barron walked away from the restaurant, his demeanor remained calm. But his mind wasn't dwelling on frustration or self-pity, it was focused on what this moment could mean, not just for him but for everyone involved. He knew the situation could easily be left as it was, a misunderstanding or disagreement fading into memory. But that wasn't the kind of person Barron had been raised to be. He wanted to leave a message, not through words, but through actions. Later that evening, Barron made a decision that surprised even those who had quietly judged him earlier. Without any fanfare, he returned to the restaurant. This wasn't to confront the manager or demand an apology. Instead, he walked up to the front desk and quietly spoke to the staff. His request was simple yet profound. He wanted to pay for the meals of every diner present that evening. The staff hesitated at first, unsure if they had heard him correctly. "Are you sure?" one of them asked, their voice tinged with disbelief. Barron nodded, his tone steady and calm. "Yes, I'd like to do this." He didn't explain his reasons or seek attention for his gesture. It wasn't about making a statement or proving a point, it was about kindness and leaving a better impression than the one the earlier interaction might have created. The diners, many of whom had witnessed the earlier scene, were stunned when they heard what had happened. Conversations began to buzz across the tables, some in disbelief, others with a sense of admiration. One man, who had quietly disapproved of the earlier exchange, shook his head and said, "I didn't expect that. That young man just taught us all a lesson." Even the manager, who had been firm in asking Barron to leave, seemed visibly moved. They approached Barron hesitantly, their earlier confidence replaced with a mix of regret and appreciation. I don't know what to say," they admitted. Barron simply smiled and replied, "You don't have to say anything. I just hope this evening turns out better for everyone." This act of quiet generosity transformed the energy in the room. What began as a tense and divided atmosphere was now something entirely different. Diners who might have been uncomfortable earlier began to reflect on the power of Barron's response. Some even took out their phones, sharing the story of what had happened and how it had ended in such an unexpected way. Now, let me ask you, if you were in Barron's position, would you have chosen to do something similar? Could you have responded to a moment of rejection with such grace and thoughtfulness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story has inspired you so far, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of kindness. But there's more to this story. Barron's gesture didn't just change the mood of that evening, it set off a series of events that went far beyond the restaurant walls. What happened next took this quiet act of kindness and turned it into something much larger. The story didn't fade when Barron left the restaurant that evening. One of the diners, still processing the quiet generosity he had witnessed, felt compelled to share it with the world. Taking to social media, they wrote, "It's not about who was right or wrong, or what you believe. It's about how you handle the moments that test your character. Tonight, I saw a young man choose grace and generosity when he could have responded with frustration or anger." The post quickly gained traction, not because it was loud or controversial, but because it resonated with a universal truth. People from different walks of life began to comment, sharing their thoughts on kindness and how such acts can remind us of our shared humanity. Some wrote about moments in their own lives when they had been inspired by someone's unexpected compassion. Others reflected on how they could approach similar situations in their own lives. It wasn't long before the post started to make its way across various platforms. A teacher in another state shared it with their students during a lesson about empathy. A small business owner, inspired by the story, decided to implement a pay-it-forward system in their store, encouraging customers to extend small acts of kindness to strangers. Barron's actions had sparked conversations that extended far beyond the diners in that restaurant. The manager of the restaurant, too, was deeply affected. Later, in a conversation with the staff, they admitted, "I acted on impulse. I didn't expect such a response from him. It's made me rethink how I handle situations." This reflection spread among the employees, who began discussing how they could create a more welcoming atmosphere, even in moments of disagreement. But perhaps the most surprising impact came from those who initially disagreed with Barron's perspective. They weren't moved by his beliefs, they were moved by his behavior. One person wrote, "I don't share his views, but the way he carried himself made me pause." It's a reminder that how we treat each other matters more than what divides us. Now, let's take a moment to reflect. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we can choose kindness over conflict? How many times do we overlook the power of a thoughtful response because we're caught up in defending our perspective? Barron's actions show us that even in moments of tension, there's an opportunity to rise above and set an example. What do you think about this? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's unexpected grace changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And if this message is something you believe more people need to hear, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use a reminder of the good we're capable of. As the post about Barron's unexpected gesture began to circulate online, its impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, comments began pouring in from people across the country. Some praised his quiet dignity, while others reflected on the significance of responding to a divisive moment with grace instead of anger. The story quickly gained traction, not because it was dramatic or confrontational, but because it highlighted values many felt were often overlooked: humility, respect, and understanding. The post sparked conversations in unexpected places. Social media users shared it with captions like, "This is what real character looks like," and "We need more of this kind of response in the world today." People who usually avoided engaging in online debates found themselves drawn to the story, not to argue but to reflect. Many expressed admiration for Barron's ability to remain composed, with one commenter writing, "It's rare to see someone so young handle a tough situation with such thoughtfulness. It's a lesson for all of us." As the story continued to spread, it reached beyond the online world. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a rare example of how small actions can lead to meaningful discussions. Morning shows featured the incident in segments focused on kindness and conflict resolution, using Barron's response as a starting point to discuss how individuals can make a difference in everyday situations. Teachers began incorporating it into lessons, asking students to analyze what made his actions stand out and why they resonated with so many. But not all the reactions were straightforward praise. Some people questioned the larger implications, asking, "What does this say about how we handle disagreements in public spaces?" Or, "Could this story encourage more constructive ways of dealing with conflict?" These questions added depth to the conversations, turning the moment into an opportunity for broader learning and dialogue. As the story continued to gain attention, its impact began to unfold in ways that reached far beyond the restaurant. People who read about Barron's response found themselves reflecting on their own behavior during moments of conflict. A social media user commented, "This made me stop and think. How often do I let disagreements get the best of me when I could choose to act with more patience and understanding?" Barron's actions set an example we all need. The incident became more than just a moment tied to a specific event, it became a catalyst for deeper discussions. Families around dinner tables talked about the importance of staying composed under pressure. In schools, teachers introduced the story to help students explore the concept of emotional intelligence, encouraging them to think critically about how to handle challenging situations with maturity and kindness. In community groups, people began asking questions that resonated on a broader level. What does it mean to treat others with dignity, even when their views don't align with our own? How can small choices in everyday situations shape how others perceive us? These conversations brought a sense of connection, a reminder that our actions, no matter how simple, can inspire reflection in others. One particularly striking moment came from a post shared by a business leader. They wrote, "Barron's ability to stay calm and make a positive impact despite the circumstances made me reconsider how I approach my own team during stressful situations." This isn't about politics, it's about how we choose to carry ourselves in the face of adversity. The restaurant manager, who had initially asked Barron to leave, also shared their perspective after seeing the widespread reaction. "I didn't realize how much my decision would affect others, or how graciously it would be received by the person I thought I had offended. It's made me reconsider how I handle difficult moments," they admitted. Their honesty sparked another wave of support, with people commending them for acknowledging their part in the story. Now let me ask you, have you ever experienced a situation where someone's unexpected response changed how you saw a disagreement? Or perhaps you've been inspired by someone else's ability to stay calm in a tense moment. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story has moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge us to think, reflect, and grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder of the impact a thoughtful response can have. This story wasn't just about a single moment in a restaurant or the choice of wearing a hat. It became a testament to something far greater, the power of how we respond in the face of conflict. Barron's actions didn't rely on loud words or heated reactions. Instead, they stood as a quiet reminder that grace and humility, even in challenging circumstances, can resonate more deeply than any argument ever could. In a world where disagreements often escalate quickly, his approach offers an alternative. It shows that choosing kindness and understanding isn't a sign of weakness, it's a demonstration of strength. It's about prioritizing human connection over the need to win an argument. This story isn't just a reflection of Barron's character, it's a reminder of the values we can carry into our own lives, values of patience, empathy, and dignity. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves in moments of frustration or tension where our first instinct is to react strongly? What would happen if we paused, reflected, and chose to respond with thoughtfulness instead? This isn't always easy, but it's in these moments that we have the greatest opportunity to make an impact, not just on others, but on ourselves. Now I want to challenge you. What would you have done if you were in Barron's place? Would you have been able to walk away with composure, or would the moment have stirred something different in you? Have you ever witnessed someone turn a tense situation into something meaningful through their actions? These are the kinds of stories that shape us, and I'd love to hear yours. Share your experience in the comments below. You never know who your story might inspire. And if this video has made you stop and reflect, I encourage you to take one more step. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of choosing kindness. These stories only grow when we share them, and your support helps us bring more moments like this to light. But here's the real takeaway: moments like these aren't just about the people directly involved, they're about all of us. They remind us that we have the ability, every day, to choose how we react to the world around us. So, as you go forward, think about the choices you make when faced with conflict. Will you meet it with anger, or will you choose something stronger, something that leaves a lasting mark for the better?